and our sisters, together we will stand. There is power in our union.
Welcome to the Long Island Fed News with John Durso, Roger Clayman, and Ryan Stanton, a monthly podcast of the Long Island Federation of Labor, AFL-CIO. I'm John Durso, your host. And Roger, please start us off with an overview of our past election.
John, we had dramatic success in this last election. A lot of pro-worker representatives went to Congress. We have a president who, from all indications, cares a lot about working people and their issues. He cares about getting this country back on the right track. He is concerned about where our economy is going and how we build back from what's been a devastating pandemic. We've lived through the COVID experience here and nationwide. Some states have done better than others. On New York, we've been up and down, and for the most part have been able to find a way to keep people safe in the workplace and to begin to roll out the vaccines, which are making all of us much safer. And we as a labor movement, of course, are doing everything we can to encourage our members to get vaccinated and to adopt safe practices and to make certain that those practices are being upheld in their workplace and to work with their employers to make certain that they go to work safely. And John, I know you continue to work in the control room with leaders on Long Island who are dealing with the issue and how to get through it safely. Give us an update on where that stands.
Well, the control room, which had been meeting each and every week, has really concentrated on getting that vaccine out, getting people connected, and trying to get this vaccine into the hands of as many of the eligible people here on Long Island as possible. And while it has been very difficult at times to get an appointment, whether it be online or there's been problems online or different areas, the fact is that we've had thousands and thousands of Long Islanders from all across the different spectrums, the different unions, the different groups receive their vaccines. And when you get there, it has been done so very well. Whether you were at Nassau Community College or whether you were at Suffolk Community College in Stony Brook or in Brentwood, or whether you were even at Aqueduct or Jones Beach, it's been done well. It's been handled well. People have gotten their first, their second vaccines. And now with the newest, the third vaccine, we think that there will be even that much more ability to get more people vaccinated, because that was one of the problems. We weren't getting enough vaccines, and now that problem shall go away. What might wind up being a problem is having enough people to give the vaccines. But that would be a good problem, that we have so many people lined up and so many vaccines. But that's being addressed currently. For union members, the different groups have been given the opportunity to be vaccinated, a lot of the essential workers, frontline workers, and some that have not yet. And that is a conversation that we have on a regular basis, trying to expand the group of people. In particular, one of the groups that we are trying to help is the Postal Workers Union. They have, obviously great concerns, and they are frontline workers, and it is something that is a matter of discussion. But so many different people now have been able to, they've expanded that base of people being able to work. So we're very pleased about that. We certainly would like to get more people tested and vaccines, and those of us who are of a certain age who are become eligible, you got to get vaccinated. And that's the thing. You have 3 different vaccines now. You got to get vaccinated. The only way we are going to get our lives back to some semblance of normal, and I hate this expression, but even the new normal, you got to be vaccinated first. So when your opportunity comes, if you listen to this broadcast, and you should be sharing it with your friends, you got to get vaccinated.
Yeah, John, my wife and I were prepared to go 6 or 7 hours to get a vaccine at the end of the month. And our last reservation was in Syracuse. And fortunately, we were able to get our first in Stony Brook, which is a little bit shorter drive. And so that's step number one. But you talked about people who are volunteering. Ryan has been volunteering to help get people vaccinated. So tell us a little bit about that experience.
Yeah, John, you mentioned a potential concern about having enough people to administer vaccinations. And, unfortunately, I don't have the education and training to do that. But the part I have been able to help with is volunteering as somebody that helps as a flow monitor, getting folks signed up for their second appointment, making sure they're registering, because as everybody should know, once you get the first shot, you have to get in within a certain timeline to get that second shot. And my wife, God bless her, she's a healthcare professional, started the pandemic in the ICU as a registered nurse, has since continued practicing as a nurse practitioner, volunteers her weekends as well with the Suffolk County Medical Reserve Corps administering those vaccines. So, our hope is to just be able to do our part and as you already stated, get back to some semblance of normalcy. So it's just been a wonderful experience to be able to help out.
The volunteers have been fabulous. It's so well run.
And, people wonder, are the vaccines safe? And I can say that the only thing I got out of it was a sore arm for one day. And that made me feel so good. It brought me back to those days of playing baseball. And that's as close as I'm going to get to the ball field. So I'll take that sore arm any day. Besides, they put it in my left arm, and I'm a righty anyway.
Okay. Well, I had my second shot last week, and I had a mild reaction. But that's okay. It was actually 12 hours from the time I got the shot that I got a reaction. It lasted about an hour, a little bit more than an hour. It wasn't feeling right. The next day I was tired, but it was sure as hell was well worth it, because, Sunday morning I felt like $1,000,000. My wife tried to sell me or turn me in because I was worth $1,000,000. But having said that, it was well worth the discomfort for a few hours to know that I'm on the road to having some semblance of a normal life again. So I urge everybody to certainly take that vaccine.
Yeah, John, I think we should just acknowledge that there are some reservations, particularly in minority communities, relating to past experiences with the health system and because of issues of access. And one of the things that's going to make this go so much better is the fact that there are clinics opening up locally or pharmacies that can help in local communities that have been severely impacted. I'm looking at Brentwood, for example, with 10,000 cases, of COVID virus, and the ability to open up clinics there is really meaningful and shows that we care about everyone. Everybody should have access.
Well, and I think both county executives and the state have made it a very good effort to do the pop-ups in the more disadvantaged areas where people didn't have access or were not as comfortable with it. But then you have leaders like Tracy Edwards, who is the head of the NAACP, who has publicly asked for members of our community to step up, speak out for the vaccine. And the only way it's going to happen, the only way that we're going to get through this, if we all do it together. We lock arms like we do in the labor movement. We lock arms and walk down this road together. And that's what we need to do.
John, you already said it. I don't know if it can be said enough. Just going back to my experience as a volunteer, I was just there to do what I was told. But the professionals that set up the pop-up clinics we're talking about in the communities, their ability to set up a well-oiled machine and get people in and out efficiently. For all the criticism about the vaccine rollout at the federal and state level, whatever folks may think, the county governments, the state governments, once these things are set up, are just doing, as you already said, an unbelievable job in administering the vaccine, and the workforce there needs to be applauded for that.
Absolutely. So what's next on our agenda there, Mr. Clayman?
Well, None of this works well by itself. No one aspect of recovering from the pandemic, and are now watching the American Rescue Plan move through Congress. And Ryan is going to give us some of the details about this significant piece of legislation that we're very much in support of.
Yeah, so before I dive into the details of the American Rescue Plan, I think it's also of note that, just last night, or at least last night as of this recording, as a result of the actions of the Biden administration issuing an executive order early in the administration as sort of a precursor to this American Rescue Plan, they instructed the Department of Labor to study the feasibility and possibility of an emergency infectious disease standard. And again, just last night, the Inspector General of the Department of Labor issued a report that suggests there's ample evidence that emergency rulemaking needs to take place, that the federal government needs to issue an emergency infectious disease standard, and that is going to protect workers and provide additional health and safety standards, enforceable standards, to make sure that workers can have faith and confidence that they're going into a safe workplace. So that was one of the initial actions that's consistent with the Biden administration's focus, transitioning to the American Rescue Plan. And the American Rescue Plan reinvests in that focus, right? What do we need to do to move through this pandemic? And it's doubling down on all the things we've talked about already. Testing, we know that it was vital getting through the past year and tracking where the numbers are and ensuring folks isolate and quarantine when necessary. And then fast forward to the vaccination efforts that we're watching unfold. And they're getting stood up. And as this administration has increased the supply, we know that has enhanced our state and local government's ability to move through this process. So investing in that and making sure that continues, because it has to, right? John, you said it. This is vital to seeing us through the pandemic. We also watched a statewide election in the state of Georgia become a national election. And that became a national election because the election of the two Democrats in that state meant a Democratic majority. And one of the issues that they ran on that's part of this American Rescue Plan is providing direct relief to working families. The economic pressures that have been put on folks, been put on communities as a result of closures, as a result of consumer confidence dropping because people are concerned for the health and safety going out into the community. We need to provide relief to Americans. And the Biden administration, the Senate Democratic majority, and the House of Representatives are looking to finish the job. $600 in direct relief was passed in the federal stimulus package at the end of last year. Those two senators, along with the majority conference in both houses, has said it needs to be $2,000. And so there's a $1,400 direct relief check built into the American Rescue Plan to help folks, whether it's put food on the table, pay rent, pay their mortgage. Restores emergency paid family and sick leave. Thank goodness, living in the state of New York, we have a state government, an executive, and both chambers that acknowledged that was just necessary for folks to be able to stay home when they got sick, to prevent the continued spread of COVID-19. And people have run out of that leave. And, the pandemic's not over. So the federal government in previous packages had passed federal leave. And in the American Rescue Plan, it restores access to that type of leave. And then something that's been a hot button issue, and it's been deemed, a Republican versus Democrat, a red versus blue issue, is aid for state and local governments. And our entire conversation here has centered around state and local governments administering vaccines, administering testing. They've taken on all these new expenses and costs, and the federal government historically would support those efforts, has failed to do so to date. And so this administration and these two majorities have said this needs to happen. And we know this going forward. If it doesn't, we're going to see cuts, we're going to see layoffs, we're going to see local government's inability to continue to carry out these absolutely necessary measures to ensure health and safety in our communities. Those are just some top line issues that are in the American Rescue Plan that matter to workers. So if you're a worker, if you're listening, make sure your senator, your congressman knows that you support this. The House passed it. And so you can go check and see if your congressman needs to be held accountable or applauded. The Senate has to pass a new version, but then it goes back to the House because of some parliamentary procedure rules, and there'll be some changes. So if they got it wrong the first time, you can give them a second chance. You can make sure they know you support it. So again, look into it, determine whether or not your congressman supported it, and for all these reasons, just make sure they know you do.
Well, not for anything, Ryan, but the people that will most listen to this broadcast will be more than happy to tell them who voted for it and who didn't vote for it, and how any congressional member can vote against that bill, is absolutely ridiculous. If they would think about the people that they represent, the people in their communities who struggle. We sent a letter to each and every congressional member on Long Island. And to think that at least 2 of them voted no because they're more concerned about voting along party lines as opposed to voting on behalf of the people they were elected to represent. Not a small minority, but everybody. The families who are struggling, the families who are trying to put food on the table, the people who couldn't go to work because they have a sick child or somebody who don't have the leave that was provided, that was running out. To think that they thought that politics were more important than the people they represent marks them as incompetent and, as far as I'm concerned, deserving of a recall or being called on the carpet for failure to do their job. And I'll be damned if I'm going to let that slide by, because each and every one of them that voted against it has got to be held accountable because they're not doing what they were sent there to do.
And we'll say over and over again that we are a nonpartisan organization, but let's look at the reality of what happened. This was a party line vote to pass this important legislation, and everything is going to be a party line vote. So there's a sickness in the Republican Party right now, and that's up to them to find people with enough backbone to stand up for the American people. We know that in this bill, March 15th, unemployment insurance is going to run out for people who are out of work because their businesses have shut down. They have not been able to go back to work. They've experienced the hardship of this pandemic. Without this legislation, these folks are lost. They have nothing to sustain them. The fact that they're going to get $1,400 for an individual is great, but it's not enough.
No.
That's a one shot.
Yeah. There are things that have to be done. And look, and you said it, we are not a partisan organization. We are made up of Republicans, Democrats, Independents. What we are a labor organization. We represent tens of thousands of families who are on all varies of the political spectrum. But we're Long Islanders. We're concerned about our communities. We're involved in our communities. And we need to stand up and talk on behalf of those people that you and I and Ryan are fortunate enough to represent. And those working families need help from the federal government. And it is inexcusable, in my opinion, that there are federal representatives who are failing to represent the people, but only are adhering to the edict from on high of the Republican Party. And this is coming from a guy who grew up as a Republican, was a Republican commitment, and did all the work. But that's not the Republican Party that I grew up in.
Well, one of the most appalling things about it is that there's $170 billion in aid to reopen schools and reopen them safely. And for whatever reason, some folks might be more interested and more focused on running for governor than they are in investing in our schools and investing in the workforce that's going to allow us to reopen and reopen safely. So, again, that's $170 billion to make sure you can send your kids to school, which means you can go to work. But some folks are more focused on politics than policy. And whatever they may say, let's look at their rhetoric and then let's look at their actions. And in this particular instance, the person I'm referring to voted against this piece of policy. So actions matter. Folks question whether or not government affects their lives. Here's a real life example. This affects your life. If your kid's home virtually and can't go to school, Well, it's because at the end of the day, these things cost money. In order to provide a safe place to educate your child and ensure that the workforce going there can be safe, there needs to be federal support. And some of our congressmen have failed at that.
Yes. And, you know, we didn't even talk about the insurrection on January 6th, and I'm sure we'll touch on that during the course of today's conversation. All right. But there is a need and a reckoning coming for failing to do your job, what you were sent there for. So we are coming to a break, and we will be with you shortly. This is the Long Island Fed News with John Durso, Roger Clayman, and Ryan Stanton, a monthly podcast of the Long Island Federation of Labor, AFL-CIO. And we'll be right back.
Congress has the chance to pass the most comprehensive labor law reform in decades, the Protecting the Right to Organize Act. The PRO Act will end years of anti-union policies, would empower workers to exercise the freedom to organize and bargain, repeal right-to-work laws, ensure that workers can reach a first contract quickly after a union is recognized. We need Congress to act now. Take action. Tell your members of Congress to support the PRO Act.
Being a Long Island educator has not been the same since March of 2020.
Our schools look very different this year.
As an educator, I want you to know that you are not alone.
As Long Island educators, we're all in this together.
In support of better days ahead, please join me in wearing red.
Wear red. Wear red.
Friday, March 12th.
For public ed.
In solidarity for all that we have been through.
For all the teachers on Long Island. We're all in this together. And although we may be far apart now, we are all certainly united and expect better days ahead.
Welcome back to the Long Island Fed News with John Durso, Roger Clayman, and Ryan Stanton, a monthly podcast of the Long Island Federation of Labor, AFL-CIO. I'm your host, John Durso. So before we took a break, we mentioned the insurrection of January 6th, and it's absolutely unbelievable in this country that we should ever see such a horrendous situation, such a riot, which was pushed for and asked for and promoted by the former guy and some of his colleagues, Ted Cruz, Josh Hawley, and the like, and even people here from Long Island on the East End out in Mastic, Shirley area. But this is a disgraceful situation, and that we are all hopeful that the FBI and the federal government investigates, finds the perpetrators, and give them a fair trial. And then, if they're convicted, send them away where they belong, because this was an insurrection against our country. Right, wrong, or indifferent, whether you are Republican, Democrat, or an independent, they attacked our government in the middle of a vote and a discussion about following the Constitution of the United States, looking to hang the Vice President of the United States, looking to hurt the Speaker of the House. It was disgraceful, and we sent letters. We've urged for people to resign or to be recalled. And we say to all that we can have differences, but violence is not the answer to try to take over our government.
John,
Roger, yes.
John, I just want to add that that you and I signed a letter to Newsday and to Congressman Zeldin asking him to resign, and we did this because he was a part of the vote that would undermine the actual results of the last election. This was on the very day that this insurrection took place. And for someone like him he's a veteran, but he's also really an active member of the armed forces, to engage in this kind of conduct is indefensible, and it goes beyond a difference of opinion about policy. And so I think that our listeners ought to know what the Long Island Federation of Labor said on this occasion.
I absolutely agree. You know, while that was going on, I was texting back and forth to a couple of members of Congress that I'm friendly with to make sure that they were okay, to check in to see that if they were safe and that their staffs were safe. It was a very scary time. That you go to the halls of Congress should be the safest places in this country. And to think that our elected leaders had to fear for their safety and the safety of their staff and their family is beyond anything that I would ever imagine. And thankfully, they were safe. We lost that one a police officer. Terrible. We saw the damage, and then we saw some real heroes. So it was an example of some of the worst behavior and some of the greatest behavior. And then for when they came back and they stood up and continued the work that they was there to do, to follow the Constitution, and to have members stand up and say it was nothing, that to support the insurrection is just disgraceful and something we will not forget, nor will we allow others to forget those who participated in that. All right, but Roger, we have so many issues coming up. Let's talk a little bit about the PRO Act.
John, I opened the newspaper this morning and I read remarks from the President of the United States. And he said, unions built the middle class. And this is President Biden talking. I made it clear when I was running that my administration's policy would be to support union organizing and the right to collectively bargain. I'm keeping that promise. The Alabama vote, Biden said, is vitally important, and he put management on notice there should be no intimidation, no coercion, no threats, no anti-union propaganda, no supervisor should confront employees about their union preferences. Amazing this has to be said by the President of the United States, but interestingly enough, no other president in our history has ever gone on the line like this to say these things about what goes on with union organizing in the United States. It's horrible what's happening, and I think people are not aware that when you try to organize a union, you go as far as to put your own life in danger, to say nothing about your job and your family security. So there is a piece of legislation coming to Congress protecting the right to organize. It's the PRO Act. And it's more than just a reform of the labor law. It has a broader impact on workers' rights and the perceptions working people have about inequality and their chances to move upward in the American economy. This is such a big piece of legislation to allow working people to gain union representation that addresses the concept of inequality in this country. It addresses racial justice by allowing minorities to move up economically through their union card, which is the real pathway to the middle class. And it really is another pathway for our own economic recovery in this country and to address issues by making people educated voters and members of the public and who can be represented and have a voice and can express their views publicly and in the workplace. So there's a lot of aspects to what this legislation does. And once again, we're going to turn to Ryan to summarize what the bill says, and then we'll talk about some of the implications.
Yeah, so I think it's important to delve a little bit into the history of labor law in this country. And I know folks may start to doze off once they hear my voice because I get a little bit in the weeds. But
No kidding.
yeah, I can always count on you for support, John. Thanks.
Listen, you do a great job. Liven it up, son.
We're putting you to sleep, right? So the National Labor Relations Act was sort of the pinnacle standard of labor law, set the framework in this country for the decades. Unfortunately, over those decades, it's been eroded. And, as Roger mentioned in the direct quote from President Biden, that it is the policy of the United States to encourage unionization in America. That comes from the National Labor Relations Act. And over those decades, it's been eroded, and the prospect that workers even get to the point of an election is against significant odds at this point because of the protections that have been eroded. And so we have an entire industry in this country that is about union busting. It's about running anti-union campaigns. It's about preventing workers from exercising their rights that are given in the National Labor Relations Act. And so the Protecting the Right to Organize Act, we are restoring those rights. We are creating a framework that discourages interference from employers. It creates actual penalties, right? President Biden just this week said, it's not up to me whether or not a worker chooses to unionize, and it certainly is not up to the employer. The framework we have in this country gives that choice to the worker. And again, the PRO Act will restore those rights. It'll give workers the collective opportunity to exercise those rights. And so the industry that supports hundreds of millions of dollars of anti-union businesses runs interference, runs campaigns, intimidates workers, and prevents them from exercising those rights. So there'll be penalties in the PRO Act that should a business choose to exercise those efforts, should choose to engage in interference and prevent workers from exercising their rights, they'll face penalties, whereas today that just does not exist. One of the other changes that we'll look at is, as we sit here today, permanent replacements can be hired by employers, effectively rendering the ability to strike useless in many instances. You talked about not only fear for their lives, but making it a little less grave for a moment, fear for losing their job. If a worker exercises their rights as they're written today, it's very likely that an employer is going to take money, invest in an anti-union campaign, and part of that campaign hire permanent replacements. And that should tell workers everything they need to know. If a company is willing to spend that much money to make sure you don't engage in an organizing campaign to assert your rights in the workplace, there's definitely some value in having a union in that workplace. And so really we're just trying to level the playing field a little bit and make sure that workers can continue to do that. And then one of the other vital points to make here is under the Obama administration, a joint employer standard was set. So if say you're a franchise, right? So there's a corporation that's sort of the founder of that franchise, and then you're a franchisee running a business under that banner. A corporation historically was able to turn a blind eye to those anti-union campaigns and just say, I didn't know that there was all this money being spent to intimidate workers, or I didn't know that there was wages being stolen, or I didn't know that they weren't adhering to the labor law to make sure that the workplace was healthy and safe. Under the Obama administration, they administered a rule under the National Labor Relations Board, who administers the National Labor Relations Act, that said the corporation could be held liable for the actions of a subcontractor or franchisee, et cetera. Under the Trump administration, that rule was rescinded. So ultimately, the PRO Act is going to, once passed, codify a standard like that to ensure that employers are not in a position to turn a blind eye, and they might think twice about who they go into business with. Those are just some of the main points. And final point, Roger made clear that this is in part a civil rights bill. The best way to ensure equity in the workplace is protection through a union contract. All workers are going to receive the same wages and benefits and same protections under that contract. And so it provides equity for folks, whether you're a woman, a minority, or any worker, period, you'll have those same protections if you choose to organize in the workplace.
Very good. Very good. And that was really, in a nutshell, you explained all the details, the nuts and bolts of this extremely important piece of legislation. Roger mentioned about safety. And, I recall two incidences that I just want to share. Some years ago, a gentleman that I work with, who's a president of a local, UFCW local, they were in the process of organizing. And he was driven off the road into a ditch, and his car overturned from goons hired by the employer. He has since passed away, not from that accident, but he was hospitalized for quite some time because he was working to protect the rights of workers who wanted to organize. Now, that is, when you talk about a situation like that, because people wanted to stand up for themselves and have a voice at their workplace, this gentleman's life was put in jeopardy. And then many years ago, down in Alabama, which is where the Amazon organizer drive is going on, there's a gentleman by the name of Henry Jenkins. Henry Jenkins was a black man, union organizer, union leader. The KKK came after him, that the FBI had to get him out of town because he had the audacity as a black man in Alabama to stand up for the rights of himself, and his fellow workers. Now that's 60 years ago, 65 years ago. It's still happening today that union organizers put their safety on the line.
Right, John, and 3/4 of employers, when they're faced with an organizing campaign, hire law firms or consultants which teach them and show them and actually carry it out, the way to beat the union, the way to intimidate workers. And 1 out of 5 workers in an organizing campaign are fired. Now that's amazing. Now, why are they fired? They're fired because they stand up as leaders, and it's to give an example. It's not quite as bad as being run off the road, but it's devastating to the organizing campaign and to the fellow workers who think this is not worth it. And over half of employers, and this is in the industrial setting, threaten to close the workplace if the union is voted in. So this is what we're up against, and that's why we need to have legislation passed to make a change, which we haven't been successful. I worked on this legislation in Congress in 1978, back when I was on the staff of the AFL-CIO in Carter administration. And Dale Bumpers wouldn't give us that 60th vote that we needed to pass cloture from the senator from Arizona. So all this time, this has been going on for a very long time. Unions have learned to live with the situation and to still be somewhat attractive to workers. Our numbers dipped steeply in the number of people who are represented by unions but are making a comeback now, particularly among younger workers. And I think it's important to talk about what is the situation? What is union versus non-union life like? And John, I thought you might give us some examples from the retail sector of what's the difference between having a union and not having a union.
It's a matter of being treated with respect. It's a matter of job safety. It's a matter of being able to step into the middle class and not have to feel like an indentured servant. There's no question about it. In the retail sector, when you have a union contract, You have a schedule, and you're not at the whim of the employer. And look, an employer has to make a schedule and they have to run their business, and everybody recognizes that. But you also have the right to have a life. So you need to be able to plan for your children, to plan for doctor visits, to plan to have babysitters. And if with a union contract, you have a schedule, a semblance of normality. You have a set time when you're working. It could change possibly every 2 weeks, once a month, whatever, but you have an opportunity. When you are an at-will employee, such as in a non-union place, you don't have that certainty. You don't have that certainty of raises. You don't have that certainty of healthcare. You don't have that certainty that when you come to work, you will not be sent home because the employer didn't like you that day, or didn't like what you were wearing that day, or maybe you were a few minutes late because your child was ill or the school bus was late. When you have a union contract, you have those protections. You have a guaranteed wage. You have guaranteed health care. You have guaranteed days off, the times off. The quality of your life is significantly better. And you find that not just in retail, but you find that in the trades. You find that in education. People who have the safety, the protection of a union contract, the quality of their lives is that much better, which means that the quality of the community in which they live is that much better. And it is that union contract that is the path to middle class. That's a path to a better life. There is absolutely no question about it. And let me just touch on very quickly about what's going on in Alabama, in Bessemer, Alabama. This has taken a hold. This is something that is being talked about across the country. I cannot tell you how many conversations I have had in the past 2 months with regard about what's going on. I spoke to the president of the RWDSU, which is the union that is organizing the Amazon warehouse in Bessemer. And they have gotten calls from around the world. Unions and leaders from various countries have been calling. They want to be involved. There are people flying in. There is a congressional delegation flying into Alabama tomorrow to meet with the workers because they want to explain to them about standing up for their rights. What Joe Biden did was phenomenal. As you said, Roger, no other U.S. president in recent history that I could ever remember has stood up and spoke so clearly about the rights of the American worker. When the UFCW was on strike up in New England a few years ago, Joe Biden came as a miserable day, but he stood out there with Marty Walsh, who now is our Secretary of Labor, to stand up and tell people to exercise their right, to speak out, do not be afraid, to stand strong, stand united, to protect their rights and the rights of their families. Amazon, they fought the mail-in ballot. They wanted people to come in the middle of COVID to come in to the plant to vote, and that they would make sure that they were safe. So now they fought and they lost, so there is a mail-in ballot. So what did Amazon do? They set up a tent and they brought in mailboxes and told their employees to use those mailboxes to bring in their votes. They held captive meetings with the employers. They have done everything possible to dissuade their workers. They're offering a bonus. If you will quit before the vote. People that are on the ability, that are on the list, that are eligible to vote, they're offering bonuses for people to quit. This is unbelievable. In 2021, the largest, richest company in this country is paying people to leave so they do not vote for the union. That alone makes you have to stand up and say, there's something wrong there. I need a union. When the employer who paid no taxes, the richest company in this world, most profitable, paid no taxes, but is willing to pay people to leave so they don't vote for a union. That tells you right there, you need nothing else of why you need a union.
You know, our partners in Europe, the trade union movement, marvels at our ability to survive as a trade union movement and our ability to organize and work with our friends and allies in the community. And many unions have learned this survival trait and used it very well. You said two important words when you were describing what's going on in the retail sector. It's dignity and respect. I'm talking to 32BJ about SEIU, about organizing in their industries of maintenance and house cleaning and in the large buildings as working as janitors. And they've concluded the same thing. Those are the two issues that are the most important to them. And they've learned that they've got to organize an entire area. Just like you organizing one Walmart store wouldn't do anything because they'd close it.
And they have.
And they have. They learned in Philadelphia, for example, that they needed to get all of the building owners within a specific geographic area. And they found that when one person, a manager, treats people badly, that can motivate the whole group to take action. So we've come a long ways, but we see though that we're going to have a difficult fight, and once again, it's probably going to be on a partisan basis. But the important thing is that we are active. We let our representatives know what the significance of this. We tell some of these stories and go to our website, and we will certainly make the information available to everyone.
And Roger, you just said, this may end up being on a partisan basis, and I think that's probably likely. But, we've had this brand of Republican here in New York that they've continuously tried to project themselves as union-friendly and worker-friendly. Well, here's an opportunity for them to prove it. Put your money where your mouth is, because the PRO Act gives the power and the rights back to workers. If you want to live up to what you've been saying year over year, go ahead, vote for the PRO Act.
You know what I heard something the other day on TV, and it's absolutely true. Don't listen to what they say, see what they do. And with that, we say, stand up, be heard, vote union. This is the Long Island Fed News with John Durso, Roger Clayman, and Ryan Stanton, a monthly podcast of the Long Island Federation of Labor, AFL-CIO. Thank you.